The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Parker, and I'm a member of the marketing team at the Perry Johnson Companies. Today, we're joined by Mel Blackmore, who's been involved with the creation, development, and implementation of British and international standards for over 20 years. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our host, so we can get started.
Great, thank you, Parker, and it's a pleasure to be here. Yes, thank you very much for joining the webinar today. So I'm going to be covering the top 10 reasons to use the ISO standard for artificial intelligence management, ISO 42001. I just wanted to mention that this is the second podcast that I've recorded on 42001. The first, sorry, not podcast, webinar, sorry, my head's in podcast mode because obviously I'm a podcaster as well. But we did record another webinar to give an overview of the standard in a lot more detail. So I will provide a high-level overview of the standard today, but obviously the key purpose of this webinar is to dive into the top 10 reasons to use the standard. Before we begin, I'd just like to give you a bit of background on Blackmores and what we do and why I'm speaking to you today. In my role as CEO at Blackmores, we're responsible for helping businesses to implement ISO standards so that organisations like PGR, for example, can certify organisations against these international standards. So we've worked with over 600 organisations in 27 countries, and we've implemented over 20 different ISO standards now, ranging from quality, risk, and sustainability. Obviously, the standard that we're talking about today is a risk-based standard. And I'm very proud to say that we've got a 100% success rate for assisting our clients to achieve certification. In terms of a few of our credentials, we're seen as leaders in our field, and we've established a commanding reputation for changing the face of how ISO standards are implemented across the globe. And this is based on ISOlogy. So we founded ISOlogy, which is a methodology that includes 7 steps to implement any ISO standard. Now, this webinar today isn't going to be explaining about how to implement this particular standard. It's an overview of the key reasons for implementing this standard. But if you'd like any further information, then please do not hesitate to get in contact with us. A lot of our resources are over in the ISOlogy Hub, which is the online membership portal with over 200 different resources, including e-learning courses, quick wins, coffee break training, and templates and downloads. And as I mentioned earlier about the podcasting, so we've got the podcast, The ISO Show. We can hear more about ISO standards as well. I'm delighted to say that as an organisation, we have an extremely high client satisfaction rating. In fact, it was 97% in 2023, which we're extremely proud of. So I touched on ISOlogy just very briefly. So these are the 7 steps in ISOlogy. So if you are looking to implement ISO 42001, the first thing that you would do is to plan the scope and boundaries of the project for your certification, or indeed you may just wish to implement best practice elements of the standard. You may not necessarily want to implement all of it. But the planning stage is key to then identify who the best people are going to be for the discovery stage, which is where you would basically have a team of representatives across your business that can come together to identify the risks and opportunities associated with AI. So this is where you would carry out a gap analysis to identify where your strengths are, but also where the gaps are as well. That then would lead you on to expose. So for ISO 42001, this would include completing a risk assessment, looking at all the risks that your organisation is exposed to in relation to the use of AI, and also to look at the legal requirements as well, which I'll come on to later on in the webinar. And then, of course, you need to create the documents, policies and procedures. I will be talking later on about how this standard can be integrated with your existing ISO management system, but it's not a prerequisite. you can implement this standard as a standalone system. And of course, launch. So you want to be able to communicate your AI policy, procedures, controls to the organisation so that they are aware of the do's and don'ts of the use of AI within your business. The next stage is engagement. So obviously you want to ensure that employees are aware and engaged and basically using the system that you've created. So the best way to be able to demonstrate that level of engagement is through internal audits, and then of course through the management review, so you can report on the output on the performance of your AI management system. So that's a whistle-stop tour of IECology. So there are 7 steps that you could use to implement the AI standard. As I mentioned, we have got the IECology Hub, so if you would prefer to get access to support via a digital route, then this is the best route for you to join as a member, where you get access to all those resources. This is just a quick snapshot of some of the clients that we've worked with. So obviously, ISO standards are based on international standards, which are applicable to organisations of all sizes, small or large, and across all industry sectors as well. So this is just an example of some of those. So let's get started. The reason why you joined this webinar was to find out a little bit more about ISO 42001. And I'd like to thank you if you joined our previous webinar, and I hope that this webinar is going to be just as useful for you, if not more. Okay, so let's dive straight in with the standard itself, because I think ultimately, I think it's good to just have a bit of a recap on what this standard is, especially if you didn't join us for the last webinar. So this standard is the first international standard for artificial intelligence management, and it's been designed to help organisations to implement, maintain and improve AI management practices. But it's a new kiddie on the block. It is a brand new spanking standard, and it was only published a few months ago, back in December 2023, by the International Organisation for Standardisation, which is ISO, and the International Electrotechnical Commission, the IEC. Now, in terms of the representation on those technical committees, there's representation across the globe from various national bodies internationally, and within those national bodies there is representation from different trades and industry. So ultimately this is a standard of best practice when it comes to AI, and it is based on this international agreement of what the foundations for a AI management system should look like. The emphasis of 42001 is on integrating AI within your organisation's existing structures. So it's not intended to be a standalone system. Invariably, if we're managing data, we're managing opportunities and risks within our business, it needs to be an integral part of that. Okay, so that basically means that you can integrate the AI requirements into your existing ISO certified management system. Now, interestingly, with this standard, and I touched on this a lot more in the previous webinar, there are specific mentions of AI and machine learning within the annexes, rather than just in the main body of the standard. And it's interesting that in some of those, there is reference to shall terminology, which, if you're familiar with other ISO standards, that basically means it's non-negotiable. You need to do it. So don't overlook the annexes. They're very important, and also they provide some really useful information, which I'll be sharing with you shortly. So in terms of the main structure of this standard, I'll just recap on this just very briefly. Clauses 1, 2 and 3 are the explanatory clauses. So that's providing information for you on what to expect in relation to AI. But these sections aren't necessarily areas that you can implement, and they're definitely not areas that you would be audited or assessed against. That all starts with clause 4, context of the organisation. So this is where you're looking at the risks and opportunities to your business and your interested parties in relation to AI. Leadership commitment is a key component here, along with other ISO standards. And similarly, you'll recognise the same requirements for planning, support, operations, performance evaluation, and improvement. So you'll recognise that common Annex SL format. If you've already got another ISO standard in place, then you will already have controls in place for all of these clauses. However, what 42001 will enable you to do is to look through the AI lens and to be able to adapt those procedures and policies that you've got within your organisation at the moment. So what's interesting is the annexes. So Annex A, similarly to, I guess, ISO 27001, when you're looking at the Annex A in that standard, details control objectives. So control objectives help you to determine what controls will be beneficial to your organisation, and it's up to you to decide in terms of the level of risk associated with not applying those controls. You need to provide a good justification for not applying those controls. Annex B helps to explain in further detail how the standard can be interpreted and applied. So ultimately, it's providing guidance on how to apply these AI controls, which is incredibly useful. Annex C is there to help to identify the risk sources and to develop potential AI-related organisational objectives around those as well. And then Annex D is how you use AI within your management system across various domains or sectors as well. Okay, so they're really useful pieces of information that support compliance with ISO 42001, and also, I think most importantly, to gain a better level of understanding. So let's look at the 10 reasons to use ISO 42001, the AI Management System Standard. So the first one I've included is to demonstrate responsible use of AI. It was interesting, I was having a conversation with somebody last week and they were very anti-AI. Whether they realised that they were already using AI or not, I don't know, because many of us are, which is something I touched upon on the previous webinar. But they were very much against it, and this is for ethical reasons. They were talking about some horror stories that they'd heard, and so I think there is a little bit of skepticism around AI, and obviously where there is any uncertainty, where there is a lack of standardization, that's where the standards come in. And that's why they're held in such high regard and why this standard has been created so quickly in order to be able to address this demand. So 42001 does help to ensure that level of fairness, non-discrimination, and also a respect for human rights in AI development and use. One thing I'd like to note at this stage is that this isn't a standard for AI developers. It isn't just for them. It is for all businesses that use AI. So it's for, just to repeat that, it's applicable to organisations that may have AI products and are AI developers, but it is also just as applicable to businesses that are using AI. Remember, AI can still be bias-based, and this is based on the fact that existing data sets still lack a representation for minority groups. So take care in the use of AI over people. Staff being replaced by AI is a very real concern and shouldn't be treated lightly. I think you need to take into consideration how this could affect your organisation. And we've already identified and highlighted in the previous webinar a few cases where this has happened and where there have been financial penalties, especially across the tech support field, where some companies have mistakenly thought that a chatbot can replace all human staff, when in fact, with Air Canada, they they did that, and it resulted in a lawsuit as its chatbot had wrongly instructed a customer. And this customer was then subsequently refused a refund after following the chatbot's instructions. But suffice to say, Canada lost the lawsuit and had to issue the refund. And they also promptly shut down the chatbot. So again, I think in terms of demonstrating AI, believe it or not, isn't always correct. It does collate information published online, which may or may not always be correct or accurate or up to date. So the standard helps to ensure that there is traceability and transparency of your company's use of AI. The data sets carelessly scraped from online sources may also contain sensitive or unsavory content, which is something that we need to be mindful of. They can also be poisoned to produce inaccurate results. So it's up to AI developers to ensure the safety and integrity of their AI tools. So this standard helps to identify these risks through conducting an AI risk assessment, which is a key part of that expose stage that I mentioned earlier on. And the standard provides specific guidance that covers transparency, explainability, and sample training data as well, which is really useful. So moving on to reason number 3. This helps us to create a framework for managing risks and opportunities if you're adopting the AI standard. And AI, like any other new technology, is going to create new risks and opportunities. Risks include the likes of inaccurate data being used, existing bias in data training sets, plagiarism, which is one that's coming up an awful lot now in businesses, along with other risks such as information security and data poisoning. So it's useful to be able to expand your current, let's say, PESTLE or risk register. So the PESTLE is something that's commonly used to support compliance with context of the organisation that I touched on earlier. So that's looking at political, economical, social, technological, environmental, ethical, and legal risks. So you can basically amplify that PESTLE by introducing AI as looking at the risks associated with your organisation. But we also can't avoid the fact that AI brings massive opportunities to organisations. So opportunities could include, increasing productivity, making smarter and faster decisions, and reduction of tedious tasks as well, which could be potentially managing large data sets. So it can be used, if used in the right way, to optimize ways of working within a business. And also, I think it provides a fresh perspective in many respects. It helps you to think outside of the box and to, get insights from obviously very clever artificial intelligence. I think an example of this is something I encountered this week, actually, which was looking at website SEO. So many organizations outsource website SEO, but there are now AI search engine optimization tools that are very sophisticated, very clever, and can help to improve your rating and the quality of the data that you've got, the content that you've got on your website. So again, I think it's important to be able to sense check this, make sure that you're not plagiarizing anything, but if used in the right way, some of these AI tools can be fantastic. I mean, from a personal perspective, we're landscaping a section of our garden at home, and I thought, well, out of interest, what's available on AI? Because I was thinking about employing a landscape gardener to potentially do some designs. And there's AI tools for garden landscaping, and you basically just upload your photograph of your garden, and then instantly you've got, you know, a dozen different designs, which is phenomenal. So it's great for looking and thinking outside the box. You know, these are great opportunities, but obviously there are risks associated with them as well that we need to be mindful of. So 42001 is basically going to help you to develop a robust management system, so a framework to manage and mitigate risks and to help to drive forward opportunities through continual improvement. I think one thing I'd like to add here, which is something that I'm referencing within our team, is that AI is great, but you need to learn how to be the master and not the servant. Okay, you need to be able to get it to use ultimately the resources that you've got, but to be able to accelerate them in the right way. So moving on to reason 4. So the standard helps to demonstrate that introducing AI is actually a strategic decision, and that you can demonstrate clear objectives to key stakeholders, both internally and externally, if you're looking at this from a strategic perspective. Businesses looking to integrate AI shouldn't take this decision lightly. Okay. You may have different departments that are using AI in different ways, and there may not necessarily be transparency or traceability on that, but that may be because you haven't actually got a clear strategy on the use of AI, clear objectives and controls. So it does start at the top. So ultimately, the strategy needs to drive the way that you're managing AI across your business to ensure that you're doing it safely, ethically, and that it aligns with your business's established objectives. And this needs to be communicated clearly to everyone in the business. And one of the things that we did here at Blackmores at the beginning of the year was to basically facilitate an AI workshop as part of our strategy day. And at this workshop, we split up into different groups. We looked at different scenarios on work that we would normally be completing, and then we basically put AI to the test with this. So that helped to basically open our eyes to the opportunities, but also the massive risks as well associated with using AI. And this has helped us to basically get feedback from the team to then shape how we're managing AI and using it to our advantage over the coming years. Number 5. ISO 42001 helps to implement safeguards. Okay, so we've heard a lot about safeguarding in schools, for example, and you know, what are the boundaries when it comes to looking at management of AI in businesses? And it helps to be able to identify what these safeguards could and should look like to help to address risks. And this could include, you know, for example, the increased potential of more sophisticated cyber attacks or compromised training data. So, for example, voices can be used, copied, and then used to pretend to be that person ultimately. So let's say if you heard me on this webinar, you could potentially record my voice, not that I don't think you'd want to, but you could do that and then repurpose that voice in order to be able to send out another message pretending to be Melanie Blackmore, which I wouldn't encourage you to do, by the way. But these are sophisticated ways that AI can be used in terms of you know, breaching data privacy. Now, if you're certified to standards such as ISO 27001, you might think, well, I'm actually doing a lot of this anyway. But actually, when you look at 27001 and the AI standard together, they do dovetail beautifully together. So that's something that I would recommend potentially bringing the AI controls from 42001 into your Annex A controls of 27001. But as I mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily need to have an ISO system in place. This can be applied, you know, within an organisation, whether you've got a certification or not, and it can be applied to a particular process or an entire system. Examples of features that might require these safeguards could include automatic decision making, data analysis, insight and machine learning, customer communications, and continuous learning. And of course, something that I mentioned earlier, which is processing large volumes of data as well. So these are just a few examples of where you could apply those safeguards. It's interesting that, moving on to reason 6, it's interesting that we're seeing an increase in legislation, which isn't any surprise in relation to AI globally. So the standard helps to identify the applicable statutory, regulatory requirements in your country. So it helps you to focus on that, because we know that inevitably there's going to be more and more legislation in this area. A good example of that is the new European Union, the EU AI Act. So that's a great example. So it's important to ensure that you're fully prepared to comply with the legislation as it's released, or you may potentially be held liable and subject to fines. And the standard helps to prevent any serious breaches by being prepared, and it helps to give you the ability to demonstrate evidence of compliance and controls to help to mitigate risk, which we know based on other scenarios with other standards, it can certainly help in a court of law if you can demonstrate clearly your policies, procedures and controls and that they've been effectively communicated. Because in effect, you've taken all reasonable precautions to help to reduce risks to your key stakeholders. So it helps to provide that evidence trail. Moving on to number 7, enhanced reputation. So I'm guessing that one of the reasons that you've already adopted ISO standards, if you're already certified, is to help to enhance your reputation as well as raise standards within your business. And this standard is no different. That's because obviously ISO standards are recognised internationally and they do help to demonstrate how you're complying with best practice. So gaining certification to 42001 will help you to basically demonstrate confidence in your AI related claims and also the fact that you're happy to have this verified by an independent third party. Although this is a really new standard, it's probably not going to be long until we see AI policies, risk assessments and procedures being asked for by new and existing clients. So, it's only a matter of time, so why not now? Moving on to number 8, encourages innovation within your business. So we've touched on different aspects of this in terms of opportunities. So I would like to stress that although obviously a lot of people perceive AI being a big risk, actually there are lots of opportunities to either develop your own AI tools to make life easier for your employees and your key stakeholders. But obviously we've just got to be responsible when we're applying it. I mean, for example, at Blackmores, we've got a team of AI enthusiasts who are looking at ways to optimize our services and also how we can use it through CPD in order to be able to raise our game as well internally so that can benefit our clients. So as I mentioned earlier, the SEO tool for which is based on AI and the landscape gardening one, is the one in your industry yet? If not, could you be the creators of it? Or could you adopt tools to enhance your service or product levels? ISO 42001 ensures that you can safely integrate AI tools and systems within your business. And it's there to help guide the adoption of this new technology and to drive continual improvement as your ISO management system matures. So I touched on clause 10 earlier on, which is continual improvement, which is applicable to all ISO standards. Again, AI could be brought into the continual improvement controls within your business too. Okay, so moving on to reason 9. Yeah, obviously this can be integrated with existing systems, but the way that it's been created, it just makes it effortless, really. So like many ISO standards, it's based on the Annex SL format, and it can be easily integrated with other ISO systems, particularly ISO 9001 for quality management or ISO 27001 on information security management. So risks addressed in 42001 include security, privacy, and quality, amongst others, and can help to enhance the effectiveness of your management system in those areas. And last but not least, number 10. So it doesn't, it does, I get my tongue in, my teeth in. It doesn't actually require an existing management system to implement it. So yes, 42001 could be a great addition to any ISO management system. It is important to note that it can be implemented independently. So unlike some other standards like the data privacy standard, ISO 27701, that is dependent on you already having ISO 27001 in place. That's not the case with this standard. So it's not intended to replace or supersede any other existing quality, safety or privacy standards or existing management systems. Great. Well, they're the 10 reasons. I hope that's been really helpful for you. Just to recap then, so number 1 is to help demonstrate responsible use of AI. Number 2, traceability, transparency and reliability. You could say I've cheated there and put 3 into number 2. The third one is it's a framework for managing risks and opportunities. Number 4, demonstrates that introducing AI is a strategic decision that helps you to develop clear objectives. Number 5, it helps to implement safeguards. Number 6, supports compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. 7, enhances your reputation. 8, encourages innovation. 9, it can be easily integrated with existing systems. And number 10, it doesn't actually require an existing management system to implement if you haven't got any other ISOs. So that's all from me in terms of delivering the presentation today via this webinar to you on the 10 benefits of ISO 42001. I'll be delighted to answer any questions that you've got, and yeah, welcome any feedback and questions. Okay, whilst I'm waiting for any questions to come through, obviously my contact details are there, so you can contact me directly if you wish. But in terms of the current status of implementation of this standard, it would probably take about 6 months in terms of implementing the standard, so 3 months to adapt your existing management system if you've got one, or if you haven't got an existing management system, to create the AI policies, procedures and controls. And then ideally you need to allow about 3 months if you wanted to go down the certification route to conduct your internal audits, following the launch, and obviously to do a management review meeting as well. So all in all, that would take about 6 months to do that. Obviously, we've got more information on that over at our website, so you're more than welcome to go over and have a look at that. But yeah, in terms of the standard itself, it's a pretty comprehensive standard, and actually pretty good read as standards go. Any other questions for me today? Oh, yeah, looks like we've got a question that's just come through. Is there certification to this standard now available? Okay. It depends on which country you're in as to whether there is an accredited certification body. So it's worthwhile checking. Are you able to put in the chat which country you're representing? I might be able to give you a better idea. Because I can only really speak on behalf of the UK at this stage. So UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, basically accredit certification bodies so that they can provide certification. But I know that certification bodies globally are offering this, but as an unaccredited scheme. Oh, thank you. So that's Jamaica. I don't specifically know for Jamaica, but I would be able to find out for you and get back to you if that's okay. And it says, oh, you've got access to US bodies. Yeah. PJR will also be able to get back in contact with you with the status on their certification as well, which obviously they have representation in the States and the Caribbean as well. But in terms of accredited certification, just looking at this based on experience, I mean, I've been working with standards for about 20 years now. Blackmores have been established for 18 years. Ordinarily, when a new standard is published, the certification bodies undertake a pilot, and then there is a witnessed audit with an accredited body. And that process can take a minimal of 6 months because, number one, the certification body needs to be trained on the standard. Number two, obviously they need to have a pilot. And number three, they need to be able to demonstrate evidence of compliance against their certification scheme for a new standard. Ordinarily, it's easier to do this if it's a related standard. So let's say, for example, if it was ISO 27001 information security, the new standard for cloud security, ISO 27017, then that can be a quicker transition for the certification bodies. So I hope that's helped to answer that question. So I've got another question here. Hi, Mel. Could you use the Isology Hub at Blackmores to fully achieve standards for 24001? I need to double check that actually. We have got some content in there on that standard, I believe, but I wouldn't say that they were created fully for the implementation to achieve certification. Are you actually, I think that might be a typo. You've put 24001. I think are you referring to 42001? I think that's probably the case. If that is the case, yeah, we're building content at the moment. We've already got some content that we've created, but we just need to record the audio on it. We're going to be creating that over the next few months. Obviously, this is a new standard. We've just trained our team on it, and we're currently running our first pilot on it. And so obviously, we want to be able to take that learning and help others to apply that. And the questions come up. I'm just going to see if I can expand on this, sorry. Considering that this is a new standard, would you recommend more frequent surveillance, such as semi-annual? So we're talking about every 6 months. Not necessarily. I mean, this isn't going to be any different to any other standard in that the certificate would be valid for 3 years. So once you've completed your assessment, you would then basically oh, sorry, I've just got another question coming through. Sorry. Yeah, so once you've completed the initial assessment, you then have an annual visit that's scheduled in, and that happens over the next couple of years. And then at the end of the 3 years, there is a recertification. Forgive me if you already know that, if you're already familiar with ISO standard certification. But I wouldn't have thought that this would have been needed to be more frequent. That's just my personal opinion, though. There haven't been any rules that have, because this is such a new standard, there haven't been any rules that have been created around that. So any other questions at all? I'm actually having difficulty seeing the entire chat box. Oh, God, no, sorry. Ah, great, okay, I've got them here now, lovely. Yeah, any other questions? I think I've answered all of those questions now. It's interesting about the semi-annual query that Cheryl brought up, though. It does largely depend on the certification body. I know that there are some certification bodies here in the UK that do their surveillances every 6 months, but they're shorter rather than a more comprehensive annual one. So I would say, you know, check with your certification body. But ultimately it is down to each individual certification body. Okay, so any other questions? Okay, well, I hope you found that useful. As I say, there's more information that's going to be coming out in the ISology Hub on 42001 over the coming months. And if you're interested in getting further updates on that, then by all means get in contact with us, and then we can contact you as and when that new content becomes available. Okay, well, thanks for that feedback, Cheryl. Much appreciated.